right, everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into a topic that I always find super fascinating, and that's international relations.
Yeah.
But specifically, we're looking at how it's evolving.
Right.
That things are changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
And we've got this great article here called The Future of International Relations, Emerging Trends and Key Challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's kind of funny just thinking about it. We always had this picture in our heads of like diplomats, in
Yeah.
these smoky back rooms making deals and stuff, but it's a whole different ball game now.
Oh, absolutely. It's a totally different world.
So we're going to try and like unpack that a little bit. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, how is technology changing things?
Right.
Are we seeing like a power shift happening in the world? And what about these non-state actors, right? Like, what role are they playing in all of this? I mean,
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how those dynamics are changing.
it's a lot to cover.
Yeah, it is.
But I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation.
I think so too. I think it's really a time of, a convergence of a lot of different forces that are kind of rewriting the rules of the game. It's not just about military might anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so interesting about this.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start with something that really stood out to me in this article, and that's this whole idea of digital diplomacy, right? I mean,
So,
can you imagine like world leaders tweeting their way out of a crisis or something?
I know it sounds crazy, but it's happening.
It's actually happening. So how is this like changing things?
Well, one of the biggest things is that it's really democratizing communication in international relations.
Okay.
In the past, it was all about these closed-door meetings, the
Mhm.
big powers kind of calling the shots.
Mm-hmm.
But now, with platforms like Twitter and even things like Zoom for virtual diplomacy,
Right.
it's giving smaller nations a voice.
Oh, I see.
They can reach a global audience,
Okay.
shape the narrative.
That's interesting. But doesn't that also come with risks?
Oh, absolutely. The article talks about how there's this whole other side to it,
Yeah.
the spread of misinformation and propaganda,
Right.
manipulation.
All that stuff.
It's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah. So are there like any examples? I mean, can you think of any countries that have actually used this like to their advantage? This digital diplomacy thing?
Yeah, there are a few. I think
Yeah.
one that really comes to mind is how Estonia has positioned itself as a leader in digital governance and cybersecurity.
Okay.
It's a relatively small country,
Right.
but they've used their expertise to kind of punch above their weight class, so to speak.
Wow.
They've been able to build partnerships,
Interesting.
influence these global discussions.
Wow, that's a really cool example.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so you mentioned cybersecurity, and I know this is a big part of the article as well.
It is, and it's a big concern.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of scary when you think about it, right? Like cyberspace is basically this whole new battleground.
It really is. It kind of
Mhm.
blurs the lines of traditional conflict.
Yeah.
We have nations like the U.S., Russia, China,
Mm-hmm.
engaging in these cyber operations that can disrupt critical services,
Right.
steal information, influence elections even.
It's like something out of a movie or something.
We don't know, right?
But the article mentions a couple of real-world examples, right? Like that 2016 U.S. election interference,
Right.
and then that WannaCry ransomware attack.
Yeah, those are just a couple of examples.
It's scary how vulnerable even powerful nations can be.
Yeah, it's definitely a wake-up call.
And what's interesting is that it's not just states, right? Like the article mentions non-state actors getting involved in this too.
Oh, yeah, you've got these hacktivist groups,
Right. Yeah.
and they can cause some serious damage.
It's like a whole new level of complexity in the world.
It really is. It's a very complex ecosystem.
Okay, so we've got diplomats tweeting, we've got hackers lurking in the shadows,
Right.
and then you layer on top of that this shift in the global balance of power.
Exactly. It's becoming increasingly multipolar.
Okay, so you're saying the West isn't calling all the shots anymore.
Not necessarily. The article really highlights the rise of China and India.
Okay.
They're becoming major players on the world stage.
Right.
China with its Belt and Road Initiative.
Oh, yeah, that's massive.
It is. It's like reshaping the economic landscape across continents.
Yeah, it's like they're building roads and railways and ports all over the place.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
And then India with their growing economy, their
Yeah.
young population,
Yeah,
they're becoming a force to be reckoned with, too.
absolutely.
I remember reading about their push for things like the International Solar Alliance, too.
Mm-hmm. They want to be leaders in shaping global solutions.
So it's not just about economic power, right? It's also about influence and leadership.
Right, and the ability to shape the global agenda.
So what does all this mean for, like, the traditional centers of power? I mean, it sounds like the West is facing some serious competition.
competition is definitely heating up. And the rules of engagement are changing. We're moving away from this unipolar world that was dominated by the West to a more multipolar world where power is more diffuse.
Okay, so that's got to have some implications for like alliances and partnerships, right?
Definitely. We're seeing a trend towards what's called minilateralism.
Minilateralism, what's that?
It's basically where countries are forming smaller, more targeted partnerships
Oh, I see.
based on shared interests
Interesting.
instead of trying to, get everyone on board with these big overarching agreements.
Okay, so we're going to have to unpack that a little bit more
Yeah, we'll definitely dive into that more.
because that sounds like a whole other can of worms.
It is.
But we're actually out of time for this part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
But don't worry, we'll be back soon to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
So make sure you stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore this whole idea of minilateralism and talk about what it means for traditional multilateral institutions like the UN.
Right, and we'll also get into the whole climate diplomacy thing.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is. And we can't forget about what all this means for those of you interested in a career in international relations.
Absolutely. So much to discuss. See you soon, everyone.
See you then.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. When we left off, we were talking about how, the world is changing.
Right.
And the old rules of international relations maybe aren't cutting it anymore.
Yeah, it's definitely a time of transition.
We talked about digital diplomacy and cyberspace becoming like a battleground. But I'm really curious about this whole shift in the global balance of power,
Yeah, it's really interesting to observe.
Like, how is that impacting the way that countries are cooperating or not cooperating to deal with these big challenges?
Well, in the past, there was a big emphasis on multilateralism,
Right.
with organizations like the UN kind of playing a central role.
Yeah.
But this article is pointing to this growing trend towards what they're calling minilateralism.
Minilateralism. Okay, so instead of those big global institutions, countries are forming these smaller, more focused partnerships.
Exactly. It's like finding common ground with countries that have similar interests on
right.
specific issues, rather than trying to get everyone to agree on everything.
I see.
Kind of like picking your battles.
Can you give me an example? What does that actually look like in the real world?
Sure. One that really stands out is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP.
RCEP. Okay.
It's a trade agreement between 15 Asia-Pacific nations,
Okay.
including China, Japan, a bunch of Southeast Asian countries.
Gotcha.
And it's basically a massive free trade zone
Wow.
that bypasses the World Trade Organization, which some people see as being too slow and bureaucratic.
So is that a sign that multilateralism is failing? Or is it just adapting?
I think it's more about adaptation.
Yeah.
In a world with so many different interests and priorities,
Right.
it's hard to get everyone to agree on a global scale. So I think countries are just finding ways to cooperate where it makes sense for them.
But doesn't that risk fragmenting the world even more?
It's a valid concern.
If everyone's just looking out for themselves, how do we tackle these big problems that need everyone on board?
Right, and I think that highlights the need for, creative solutions.
Yeah.
Innovative diplomacy.
How do we bridge those divides?
Exactly. And climate change is a perfect example.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's a truly global issue that needs international cooperation.
And the article talks about, the urgency of climate diplomacy.
Right.
They point to the Paris Agreement as a big step forward.
It was a landmark achievement for sure.
But they also acknowledge that progress has been slow.
Yeah, it's been a challenge to implement.
And that there are still a lot of roadblocks.
Absolutely.
So what's the solution? I mean, how do we move forward on something as complex as climate change?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that it's not just about governments anymore.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, we're seeing a growing role for non-state actors.
Oh, okay.
Businesses, cities, NGOs, even individual activists.
So they're getting involved in climate diplomacy, too.
Yeah, they're driving innovation, pushing for policy changes.
Holding governments accountable.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
It makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah.
Climate change impacts everyone.
So everyone needs to be part of the solution.
Right. We're seeing this shift from a state-centric approach to a more multi-stakeholder approach.
Okay, I like that.
It's about partnerships between governments, businesses, civil society organizations.
Yeah, it's like everyone coming together.
Exactly.
I've read about how some cities are taking the lead on implementing sustainable practices, even when their national governments are lagging behind.
Right. They're often more proactive because they're on the front lines of climate change.
Makes sense.
So, we've got diplomats navigating this digital world,
Yeah.
hackers testing the boundaries of cyber warfare,
Mm-hmm.
the balance of power shifting,
Right.
this trend towards minilateralism.
And the urgency of climate diplomacy.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It is, but I think what's really fascinating is the growing influence of these non-state actors.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about that.
They're becoming really powerful players in the international arena.
So, like, what kind of influence are we talking about? How are they actually shaping things?
Well, think about multinational corporations, for example.
Okay.
They have huge resources,
Yeah.
global reach.
Right.
They can influence trade policies, labor standards, environmental regulations.
Even political decisions.
I mean, that's the power of globalization, right?
Yeah, these companies operate across borders,
Exactly.
so they have a lot of leverage.
And it's not just corporations.
Right.
NGOs are playing a huge role, too.
Like shaping the conversation on things like human rights and sustainable development.
Exactly. They're mobilizing public opinion, putting pressure on governments
Driving change.
from the grassroots level.
The article mentioned groups like Greenpeace and Amnesty International as examples of NGOs that have like really challenged, powerful institutions
Man.
and influenced international policy.
Yeah, they've been incredibly effective at raising awareness,
Right.
advocating for change.
Holding governments accountable.
Absolutely. And there are countless others working on a whole range of issues.
That's amazing.
It really is.
But I'm curious, how do they interact with governments?
That's a key question.
Like, do they work through traditional diplomatic channels?
It's interesting because it really highlights how diplomacy is evolving.
Okay.
It's not just about governments negotiating behind closed doors anymore.
Yeah.
It's about engaging with all these different actors.
So it's becoming more inclusive?
In many ways,
Yeah,
yes, more
okay.
collaborative. These non-state actors are bringing new perspectives, expertise, resources.
They're shaking things up a bit,
Yeah, they're challenging the traditional power structures.
pushing for more transparency.
Accountability.
So it sounds like we're moving towards a more dynamic, interconnected world,
Definitely.
which is exciting, but it also raises questions.
About the future of diplomacy.
The role of those traditional institutions.
Something we'll have to keep grappling with.
Okay, so we're just about out of time for this part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But we'll be back soon for the final part, where we'll discuss what all of this means for anyone who's interested in a career in international relations.
Right. We'll talk about the skills you need,
The knowledge.
the kind of mindset you need to thrive in this field.
So stay tuned for part 3.
We'll see you then.
Welcome back, everyone. So we've talked about all these like crazy changes happening in international relations.
It's a wild ride.
It is. But now I want to get practical, like what does all this mean for someone who's actually thinking about like
Right.
a career in this field?
Well, I think it's a really exciting time to be entering the field.
Okay, good.
The demand for people who understand this complex landscape. It's growing like crazy.
That's great to hear. But I imagine it can also be kind of intimidating.
Oh, absolutely.
With all these changes, it's like, where do you even start?
Right. Well, I'd say the first thing is to just, be really curious about the world.
Okay.
Immerse yourself in international affairs, read everything you can get your hands on, follow experts on social media,
Okay.
listen to podcasts.
Like this one, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The key is to stay informed.
And develop that global mindset.
Precisely.
But it's not just about like memorizing facts and figures, right?
No, it's about understanding the bigger picture,
Right.
the connections between different issues and regions.
So you're saying it's important to specialize.
Yeah, I think so.
Because the article mentioned a few key areas.
Like cybersecurity,
Climate diplomacy.
Asian geopolitics.
If someone was interested in, say, cybersecurity,
Mm-hmm.
how could they build a career in that area within international relations?
Well, you could definitely consider a degree in international relations or a related field, maybe with a focus on cybersecurity.
Because a lot of universities offer those now, right?
They do.
Yeah, like specialized courses or even whole degree programs.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more common.
But I guess technical expertise is important too.
Oh, absolutely.
Like certifications or training in ethical hacking or network security.
Yeah, those are really valuable.
So you kind of need both, right? The international relations knowledge and the technical skills.
Exactly. You need to understand the context,
The geopolitics.
but also the technical side of things.
Makes sense.
And then, of course, there are language skills.
Oh, yeah. Those are always important in this field.
They are.
Are there any specific languages that are becoming, like, essential?
Well, the article mentioned Mandarin Chinese
Because of China's growing influence.
Right.
What about others?
Arabic is also in high demand.
Especially for the Middle East.
North Africa.
And Spanish is always a good one to have, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But it's not just about speaking the language, is it? It's about understanding the culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You need to be able to communicate effectively, respectfully, with people from different backgrounds.
It's like that cross-cultural competence.
Exactly.
Being sensitive to those cultural differences.
Right. Because at the end of the day, this is all about people.
So what kind of person thrives in this field? Is there, like, a specific personality type?
I don't know if there's one specific type,
Yeah.
but certain qualities are definitely helpful. You need to be curious, adaptable, a good communicator, a good listener.
Because things are always changing.
Exactly. And you need to be able to handle those unexpected situations.
Right, roll with the punches.
And I'd say a strong sense of ethics is crucial too.
Oh, yeah.
You're often dealing with sensitive information.
Right.
Making decisions that can have a big impact.
So integrity is key.
Absolutely.
It's not just about your own career, it's about making a difference.
Right, and I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to this field. They want to make the world a better place.
Whether it's promoting peace, protecting human rights.
Addressing climate change.
That's pretty inspiring.
It is, and it's important work.
So any final words of advice for our listeners who are thinking about this path?
I would say don't be intimidated by the challenges.
Embrace them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is a field that's constantly evolving, which means there's always something new to learn.
New skills to develop.
New ways to make an impact.
It's a challenge, but it's also super rewarding.
If you're passionate about making a difference, it's worth it.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From the rise of digital diplomacy to the shifting balance of power.
The growing influence of non-state actors.
And the urgent need for climate action.
It's a lot to think about.
It is, but I hope it's given you a better understanding of this complex and ever-changing field.
Yeah, I hope so too.
And if you're interested in pursuing a career in international relations,
don't be afraid to go for it.
The world needs passionate, engaged people.
More than ever.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep making a difference.
That's what it's all about.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.